All right, well, we didn't take any questions from your Bible reading last week, so let's go ahead and do that this week. Anybody got any questions, either for Bible readings or other things that you go, anything you've read or hit on in Sunday school or anything like that? Andy?
I don't think it's Leviticus or Exodus, if I can read that, but it was talking about the meeting place. It references the place of meeting once, and then it references the tabernacle, their place, as the meeting place. Is there a place that was the meeting place before?
That seems to be the way it reads, but I'd have to go back and really study it. But that was a question I had that I need to look up and do a little research on. But I think there was a place that was kind of the meeting place until the tabernacle is actually set aside and consecrated, and all those things that you have happening in Leviticus and Numbers as far as the anointing. So the question was the tent of meeting, or the place of meeting that Moses went to that was outside the camp, a different place than the tabernacle that God gives him directions to build. And depending on how it reads out, because the tabernacle goes in the middle of the camp, so it seems like maybe there was a place that Moses went to meet with the Lord, and this would seem to fit, before they finished building the tabernacle. So the tabernacle's not built in a day. It takes them a little while to get that together, so that's going to take some time. And so they would not have been without the place of worship or anything. So, okay? But yeah, knows that. Other questions?
Follow on that.
Okay.
The woman at the entrance to the meeting place, they gave up their bronze mirrors. They appear to be different women than they are mentioned in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and
Okay. Well, obviously, because there's like 600 years between those two times.
well, okay.
Or 500. Definitely be different.
I don't mean time frame. I'm talking. Yeah, they're. She's going to have an important base point apparently in Exodus. By the time they get to 2 Samuel, they have a low reputation attached to them.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go back as far as the difference there. You'd have to go back and actually look at it. Keep in mind that in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, as they're doing the wilderness wandering, everybody that's involved in any of the worship stuff is definitely, there's definitely working there. And by the time you hit 1 and 2 Samuel, even though you're still just using the tabernacle, what it really looks like is that they found a spot, put the tabernacle up, and left it there. And possibly even, started building, houses or a small village around it, that type of thing. And that's the Old Testament, we're going to talk about that thing where people argue which one they did. And so there you have the opportunity to attract people who are, shall we say, more interested in their own, the same thing you see with Eli's sons, who are priests, but who are obviously in it for their own benefit. So I think once you build that more permanent structure and everything is there, you end up with folks who are trying to take advantage of the location, because everybody still has to travel in to worship. And so you've got all of this travel, and anytime you've got that, when people have to travel to a place, there's always an opportunity to try to profit off of that in some way or another. So I think that's what you end up with, because folks are coming from Dan to Beersheba and coming back to Shiloh, and that's a long way to go. And so then you get there, and you got men traveling without their wives, and so you've got problems there. You've got people that travel that, now you charge twice as much for pig here, not pig, but sheep, goat, whatever. You don't charge anything for pigs, that's just how. But some of us that we have that much business sense, we'd have taken out the bacon concession at the tabernacle and wondered why our business failed. But anyway, Brad?
In Leviticus also, when talking about Moses got what he had to tell Aaron and all Aaron's sons, when they bring the sacrifice, how many sons? Because you go like a timetable, it seems like it takes you to go for
That's-
sacrifice. Another day or two pass by, I'm just curious how many sons were.
Yeah, Leviticus talks about, the sons of Aaron and the Aaronic priesthood and all of that, and a couple of things with that. First of all, yeah, there's a lot of sacrifices, and in terms of immediate descendants, you've got not near as many, and then Nadab and Abihu, and so you cut two out, and so that's obviously a problem. Couple of possibilities with how they actually made that work. First of all, the rest of the Levites are supposed to help with the sacrifices, and the rest of the priests. And then, as the generations go on, and you've got 4 to 5 and 6 kids a generation, it doesn't take long before the population growth is going to meet the need. And beyond that, you've got help. You've got the possibility that it's, yes, Aaron's sons are in charge. But the way they offer the sacrifices is that they supervise the six guys over here that are helping them, type of thing. So, and also, folks had to be patient. We live in an instant society, and so it's like, okay, what I want is to be able to walk in with my sheep, have the sheep sacrificed, and get on back about my life. But one of the main things that you learn from a sacrificial system that uses animal sacrifices is that there is no instant worship in that situation. Because, first of all, you've raised this sheep. This is part of the flock. And you're not big sheep farmers. You don't have 10,000 of them. Okay? Everybody's got small flocks that they're working with. And so you're going to know, you're going to be aware of, hey, this is a 5-year-old sheep. And I remember when it was born along with these others. And it's now big enough to be used as a sacrifice. And this is what my sin costs. Is all that work for the last 5 years to feed this one and to raise this one. And what am I losing from this? Well, I know how much wool I get off this sucker in the next 5 years. My sheep live 15 years. I don't know how long sheep typically live. Okay? That's not really one of mine. That has not been one of my hobbies. And it will probably never be a hobby. If it ever has to be a job, it has to be a job, but it's not a hobby. But then the whole process, the execution of the sacrifices, seems kind of grim and gruesome. It takes a lot of effort to get all the blood out of an animal. If you have never, field dressed your own deer, you may not realize just how much effort that takes, but realize that's part of the responsibility of the sacrifice. That takes time, especially when all you can do is hang the thing up and let it go. Okay, and we won't get any more gruesome than that. But that's not an easy task. So the whole thing forces it to take time, and as a result, because you're forced to take that time, you're also forced to interact with the other people who are waiting. It's like the small conversation knots that dredge up whenever you're with a group of people and you're all waiting on the same thing. It's like, well, they don't open the gates to go into the ball game until 6:15, and so here we all are standing under the Broadway Bridge in the shade, waiting for the Travelers game. And so you visit with people that you don't even know, or you visit with people that you do know, and you actually accomplish some interesting Baptist preacher discussions. But when you run into folks that you know, or everybody's waiting for a table at a restaurant, and so you end up interacting, those types of interactions. What's this or what's that? So you have those that building of community. Oh, yeah, what are you? And when it's a sin sacrifice, it's like, well, what are you here for? Well, I said this to my neighbor and bring you. What are you in for? Well, sheep stealing. No. But yeah, it would have been ponderous. We're very used to. We like to be able to walk in the door, and here we go. And it just doesn't work that way, especially in a system with dealing with sacrifices and such. It just would have taken time, which again reflects back on. It's part of what God is teaching them through the sacrifices is that your sin has a cost. Sin has a cost, and it's not a cost that can be easily paid. It's a cost that takes effort and the one thing that everybody's equal and everybody gets 168 hours a week. So, You can't buy your way to, if you can't buy your way to the front of the line, it kind of points that out and pulls you back. So, but you're right, it would have taken a while, because Aaron doesn't have a lot of sons. And then, like I said, Nadab and Abihu, they,
Makes you not want to ever see
amazing thought. It makes you not want to, it should drive home the point of how awesome the grace of God is. Because this is what Jesus did in our place, is he offered himself as a sacrifice. And this is one of the things that we really do poorly, is when we take that grace and that sacrifice and just kind of, well, because it's immediate, the old has gone and the new has come, like that, then we just, oh, whatever. And we just kind of treat the grace of God like it's not that big of a deal. And so, we don't build a discipline with it. We don't build a walk with Christ with it. We just do it in an instant. And we don't think about, since we can, we do. We don't think about, we don't look at it and say, well, just because I can doesn't mean I should. But that's what we become. So, and we be careful. But yeah, it's a good point. We'll take a while. Huh? It's like a cattle auction. See that? Anybody else? Ann? Oh, Shelby, sorry. Okay, 2 Peter 3 talks about those before us who have fallen asleep, and that's talking about the people that were in the service this morning. Especially the longer it goes, the more comfortable you get, folks go to sleep. So, all right, so 2 Peter chapter 3, let's see if we can find this spot here. All right, chapter 3, verse 4, saying, grace is coming that he promised. Ever since our ancestors fell asleep, all things continue as they have been since the beginning of creation. Sleep is frequently used as a metaphor in the New Testament for death. Okay, so that's what it's talking about. And that is the idea, is that our ancestors are dead and gone, and then on and on and on. And he's supposed to, God's supposed to be coming in judgment, but great-grandparents thought God was coming in judgment, and they're all dead, and it didn't happen. And grandparents, and some of them are still alive. So where does it happen? So that's what he's talking about. But sleep is a metaphor or an expression for death. Peter uses it. Paul uses it in Corinthians when he talks about the Lord's Supper. He talks about that the judgment that has come. It's because you don't because you do this, take this lightly. That some of you are sick, and some of you have fallen asleep. And what it means is some of you are even dead because falling asleep on it. Unless you're Eutychus in Acts, who falls asleep in church and falls out the window and dies. That is actually one of the great stories in the book of Acts, where Paul is preaching, and there's actually a preaching book. I think I have 2 copies. I need to get one for Brad. But it's a basics of preaching books from these guys in Australia, from these Australian preaching professors, and it's called Saving Eutychus. Because the story is, in the book of Acts, the story is that Paul is in town, he's preaching all through the night. I don't think I get long-winded. No, they started when the sun went down, and about midnight, Eutychus is sitting in the window, just can't take it anymore, and he nods off, and he falls out of the window, out to his death. And so Paul then runs down, gives him a hug, God raises Eutychus from the dead. Okay? And the best part of the story is what happens next. And that's not a clickbait statement. It's what happens next. It's not that everybody, yay, Eutychus is alive, let's have a party. No, they all go back upstairs and Paul preaches till the sun comes up. But nobody else fell asleep because you never can expect the same miracle twice. But he really fell asleep, and then he died. but yeah, 2 Peter it's that. So no, good question. All right, anybody else?
Well, I've read all that in laws and the do this and the sacrifices and all of that. You know, is that why the Pharisees got where they made their own laws, because they were looking at it as works and not pointing to Christ?
That's what the Pharisees pick up on the law. And what you have happen is this. Judgment falls on the nation of Israel after they split to two kingdoms, okay? Northern kingdom Israel, southern kingdom Judah. Northern kingdom, all bad kings, destroyed by the Assyrians, gone. Southern kingdom, mostly bad kings, taken into Babylonian captivity. While they're in captivity, they pick up and they finally start at least a little bit listening to the prophets and the fact that this has happened to you because you broke the covenant. You were supposed to do this, you were supposed to follow these laws, and you didn't. And because you didn't, bad things happened. And then they get restored. They come back into the land under Ezra and Nehemiah, and they rebuild the temple. And there for a while, they have a level of independence, even though they're in the Persian Empire. But the Persians were very, and this is not a bad word in this case, but the Persians were very liberal with the way that they behaved. The Persians were, if you pay your taxes, and send us people, when we send a note to you that says we need 5,000 soldiers, you send us 5,000 guys to go fight. We don't care what you do. Okay? As long as you pay your taxes and contribute to the army, we don't really care what you do. And so they were allowed to rebuild their worship and to do what they believed God wanted them to do. And so they started trying to follow the law fairly well. And then they got conquered by Alexander the Great. Okay? And, it's kind of a good thing that his son didn't take his empire, because after, your dad's the great, what are you going to be? The almost great, slightly greater. I was great, but never mind. I mean, where do you go? Where do you go from there? So Alexander the Great takes over, and then after a while, the nation of Israel even sets out and they become completely independent. Okay, the successors of Alexander eventually lose Israel and it becomes a completely independent nation again. And they're very, very happy about this, because here they've been restored. Okay, here's our country, here's our nation back, and so we're going to follow God's law. We've got the temple, we're going to offer sacrifices, we're going to follow all of these rules. Yay! It lasts about 100 years. And then they get to fighting about who's supposed to be in charge. Okay, notice this morning we talked a little bit about this in the sermon, that in Judges, what the part of the problem comes from. Well, who's supposed to be in charge next? This is a constant problem in the Old Testament, by the way. Who's supposed to be in charge? It pops up in the New Testament. Who's supposed to be in charge of the church? It's like, Jesus, stop it. It's the answer. In the Old Testament, it's, the prophets, the priests, the king, this king, that king, whatever. And so they're having this argument about who should be in charge. Meanwhile, the Roman army for the Roman Empire is just over the next hill. And so one guy who thinks he should be in charge says, I know what I'm going to do. He goes over the hill to the Romans and says, hey guys, if you will come to town and tell everybody I should be in charge, I'll open the gates and surrender the whole city to you. This is, by the way, the very, very simplified version. Okay? You might pass the test for this, but you're not getting an A. Okay? And so the Romans come in and take over. And they still allow some of their own freedom of worship to the Jews. But what the Pharisees develop, and they get to looking at it and say, wait a minute, all of this trouble came from not following the law. So we got to make sure we follow the law. But the way that they went about it is they began to develop and say, okay, well, here we go. We could just run down this row of lovely young ladies in the front row. And I can look at you and okay, if I tell you that the commandment is do not commit murder, everybody's cool with that. Nobody's really going to argue about what that means, right? This means yes, this means leave me alone. Okay? All right, but if I look at you and say, the commandment is keep the Sabbath holy. And I'm not going to make y'all answer this out loud. But every one of you is going to come up with a slightly different answer. Because first of all, some of you are going to go, wait, Sabbath. Which day of the week is that? Because I got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Which one's Sabbath? Sabbath, okay? It means seventh day, okay? But what does it mean to keep it holy? Go to church, do no work. Okay, what's it mean to do no work? Yeah, I mean, it's work to sit here and listen to Doug. It's work to cook lunch, but I had to eat lunch. So how am I supposed to eat lunch? And so you start ending up with all these questions. And the Pharisees, their goal was to come up with an answer to all of those questions so that they could look at you and say, this you can't do. For example, Jesus heals a guy. He's a lame man. He's been laying on a mat. Heals him on the Sabbath and tells him, take up your mat and walk. Well, the Pharisees see him and say, hey, you're carrying your mat around. You're not supposed to do that. That's work. They had laws about how far you could travel on the Sabbath. That's why you see in Scripture, you actually see this term, a Sabbath day's journey. But then they decided, well, sometimes you got to go farther than that, or sometimes you're really far away from home and you had to do a lot of business the day before and you couldn't get home. So they determined that any place that certain things of yours were counted as your home. And so then you could go, and what you would do is this. Trent's one of my employees. I'm going to send Trent ahead of me just to the edge of a Sabbath day's journey. I'm going to have him leave my spare pillow. And then I'm going to have Blaine go that amount farther and leave my spare blanket. And that way the next day I can go to where my pillow is, and then I can go to where my blanket was, and then I can go a Sabbath day's journey from that. I can get all the way home. And so they started cutting edges and loopholes around it. But that's what they did. They built out that legalism because they were afraid. They were zealous that the people of Israel would never make the mistakes that led to the exile again. Because they didn't want that to happen. But as a result, what they did is they built a law, they built a framework around the law that kept them from seeing the Messiah, kept them from seeing Jesus when Jesus came, and kept them from seeing the law as pointing to Christ. Okay? Legalism, and this is the illustration that I've used and I've heard other preachers use. I don't know where it came from originally, probably from, I don't know, Abelard in the 11th century. But if you can imagine that it's not safe to play in the street, and for the record, it's not. Okay? You've seen the way people drive around here? It's not safe to play in the street. Okay? So the law is, don't play in the street. But then we stop and go, wait a minute, how do we make sure somebody doesn't play in the street? So we build a fence right beside the street. And we say, don't touch the fence. Well, now we've added to the law. And then we say, wait a minute, though, what if somebody does get out there and touch the fence? And you know how some people can be, some people see a fence, they're just going to climb it. Whether they should or not, they're going to climb over that fence. Because some people just got to do it. You know who you are. Okay? Some people are going to lean on it, it's going to fall over, they're going to fall in the street. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move that fence 10 feet back from the street. Now we're becoming more legalistic. Because the law is, what God's command was, don't play in the street. But now we've cut 10 feet off the yard. You say, wait a minute, now what if somebody goes over there, let's move that fence farther back, because better safe than sorry. But what we miss is that God gave us the whole yard of grace and freedom to play in. This is how you end up, for example, with church traditions that become very, very limiting on expressing joy. Okay? Or this is how we're going to do church, whether we like it or not. Sit still, be quiet, keep your hands in your pockets. Say it like this. Why? Well, because some people get a little bit too nuts and they're not worshiping God, they're acting like idiots. Okay? Let's just be honest. But we fence it off way on back here so that all anybody ever does in church is sits here like a knot on a log, and it's like, well, this is joy in Christ. Happy in Jesus, so happy indeed. Yeah. Y'all, it is indescribable and uncontainable. He sees the depths of our hearts. He loves us the same. You are amazing, God. Amazing is not a light and fluffy word. Okay? You are amazing, God. So, but that's the kind of legalism that builds out there, and the trouble that we get into with it, because we keep backing away from that which God has given us. And no, you shouldn't play in the street. No matter what. If you take all the fences down in the world, don't play in the street. But you don't build the fence 100 feet away either. And say, well, just to be safe. And that's what the Pharisees had done, is they had fenced everybody back so that they could try to fit everybody in this little box. The Pharisees are one of your main people in the New Testament. They crop up all the time. And they spent all their days worried about whether or not people got out of the fence, because they were worried about getting out of the fence and too close to the street, even though the street was probably a half a mile away. They did things like, it was not uncommon, it's cool and new and hipster these days, to plant little garden pots to grow little herbs and trim your little fresh mint off. You can buy it at Kroger. You trim a little bit off and freshly season the stuff you're cooking, with some of your green herbs. The Pharisees would tithe on that. They would cut, hey, we need an inch of mint to go in the soup today. So they would cut an inch, and then they'd cut off a tenth of it and throw it away. Because you couldn't get that to the temple, okay? And once you got it there, the priest didn't know what to do with it anyway. But they would throw it away. If a Pharisee came to your house for dinner, and you set a meal in front of him, he's going to look at it, he's going to take a tenth of that portion, okay? You set in front of him 10 breadsticks, he's going to take a breadstick, and he's going to set it aside and not eat it. Because a tithe is a tenth. And he's going to tithe on that, just in case you didn't tithe on all of the parts of the meal. Because he's worried about making sure that we don't bump up against the slightest bit of the law. But you know what he's going to do with that breadstick? Or that tenth of the pizza? He's going to toss it. While somebody else goes hungry with it. Kind of missed the point. Because if you go back into Leviticus and you read about the sacrifices and you read about the tithes, some of it, yes, was used to maintain the religious structure of everything. Keep in mind, there's no separation of church and state. So everything that is Israel in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is funded through tithes and offerings. Okay, that's why they've got a tithe for this and a tithe for that, and then this triennial stuff, and these things go on. But when you read it, you're supposed to do this in your local community with your sacrifice and eat it with all these people. This is supposed to be burnt up entirely as a sweet savor to the Lord, but the rest of the cow, you eat with your family, with your community, as you're restored in fellowship. You offer this much grain that you throw towards the fire, and then the rest of it goes to the priest that he makes bread with and lives off of for the rest of the month. All those things go on. None of it was intended to be wasted or thrown away as a symbolic act. None of it's symbolic. All of it has a purpose. And the Pharisees missed that. They just kind of cast it aside. So yeah, but that's what they were doing, is that at the start, their heart was right. And they had a better belief about God than the Sadducees, who was one of the other groups that shows up in the New Testament a lot. Because the Pharisees at least believed in eternity. The Sadducees did not. Okay, the Sadducees did not believe there was a resurrection at all. They thought you lived, you died, you were done. And yes, in master's level education, this is how you remember that. They don't believe in a resurrection. That's why they are sad, you see. Okay, the Sadducees, that's why. It comes from people with PhDs trying to help people get master's degrees. Remember, okay, Sadducee. That's where it comes from. And they don't believe in that at all. They don't believe in a resurrection. They figure once you die, you're done. They match with the Epicureans in Greek philosophy, and they're both wrong. So the Pharisees believed in angels. And as a result, they also accepted that there were demons. The Sadducees didn't none of that. The Sadducees were functionally almost atheistic in their belief system. Well, there's a God, there's a law, whatever. We're in charge. That was their main approach. So, all right. Good questions. Take your Bibles and look at Judges chapter 3 with me. We want to talk about a judge. Next Sunday morning, we're going to look at Judges chapter 2 with the cycle and how to break the cycle that you see in the book of Judges. Because what you have in Judges is this cycle of bad to worse to not quite as worse to really worse to all the way down. I mean, it's like, oh, it's terrible. But we're going to look at a judge named Ehud. So chapter 3, starting in verse 12. The Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord, or again did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel, because they had done what was evil in the Lord's sight. And Eglon convinced the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join forces with him. He attacked and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites served King Eglon of Moab 18 years. So this morning we hit on Judah being given a task by God, and they say, hey, let's go get some help. Simeon, come help us. And they go and they do, and they accomplish what God called them to do, which was good. Here you have Eglon, king of the Moabites, who says, hey, we're going to go do bad things. Let me get some buddies to help with that. He gets the Ammonites and the Amalekites. The Ammonites and the Amalekites are always bad guys when they show up in Scripture. Okay, there's not a time that it pops up, it's like, and then the Ammonites rode to the rescue. Nope. Ammonites, bad. Yeah. But Ammonites and Amalekites, and so they come, they put the hurt on Israel, and for 18 years the people of Israel are oppressed and enslaved by the Moabites. So they're still in their land, but still trouble comes to them. And we don't know exactly how or exactly what went on, but basically, probably they are overtaxed, overstressed. These guys ride into town and say, hey, we need some new slaves. You guys look good. You're coming with us as slaves. And there's nothing that the Israelites can do to stop it. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjaminite, as a deliverer for them. The Israelites sent him with the tribute for King Eglon of Moab. So here we get the first part, and that is that they're supposed to send tribute every year to Moab, to the king. And God raises up a guy who is left-handed. Now, these days, we kind of understand heredity, and we know what left-handedness is not a sign of anything weird. You're just left-handed. It's just different. God made us all a little bit different. God made you special, and He loves you very much, but He made you different from the person. You're unique, just like everybody else. You're special. Some of us have blue hair. Some of us have blue eyes. Some of us have, I don't know why I went with blue hair. I meant to say blonde hair and brown hair, and I went to blue hair. Some of us got no hair, that type of thing. All these things happen. We're all different. God made us different. Some of you are right-handed, some of you are left-handed. But back then, being left-handed was kind of a weird thing. And it would cause you to be a social outcast. And certainly, everybody was taught, if you were taught to fight or taught to use a weapon, you were taught to use your right hand. But God raises up somebody who's going to have been rejected from the folks around him. Ehud made himself a double-edged sword 18 inches long, or about a cubit at that moment. He strapped it to his right thigh under his clothes. This is concealed weapons 101. He put it where nobody's going to look. Okay? Because if you're right-handed, your sword goes, either out here or out here. You either draw this way or you do like the Romans and you draw this way. But you don't put it on the inside of your thigh there because you can't even get to that. It's really awkward because you're not wearing pants, you're wearing a robe. Okay? So it's a really awkward type of situation. So but he conceals his weapon there. And he goes. He brought the tribute to King Eglon of Moab, who was an extremely fat man. Okay, Scripture gives us all sorts of interesting details. Judges would make for a great movie or mini-series, and it would probably be, TVMA worse than some of the stuff that's even on. Ehud finished presenting the tribute. He dismissed the people who had carried it and sent the people with him. At the carved images near Gilgal, which is, it's an idol. All right, there's some idols there. He returns and says, King Eglon, I have a secret message for you. The king said, silence, and all his attendants left him. Then Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in his upstairs room where it was cool. Ehud said, "I have a message from God for you." The king stood up from his throne. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into Eglon's belly. Even the handle went in after the blade, and Eglon's fat closed in over it, so that Ehud did not withdraw the sword from his belly, and the waist came out. Happy. Ehud escaped by way of the porch, closing and locking the doors of the upper room behind him. So what we have is God sends Ehud to assassinate King Eglon. And it's not a very tasteful or happy moment. Okay? This is, I wouldn't want to see that. Certainly wouldn't want to do it. But God sometimes calls us to do things that are a little bit challenging, a little bit difficult. And then Ehud escapes, raises up the army to fight back, and they are delivered from the Moabites. And there's just some other interesting, weird details. So a couple of things of application for this. First of all, the details that we get in the book of Judges some of them seem bizarre. They certainly don't line up with the details. When you go to school this year and you pick up your American history book, you're not going to find details like that about what happened with Thomas Jefferson or what happened with this person or that person. You're not going to find those details because those are the ones that you kind of gloss over when you tell the big stories of what happens. So we take from the presence of those details the idea that this is written down and recorded by people who were present when it goes on. Not necessarily that Ehud writes it down, but that when Ehud gets back, that it's recorded and the records of this are kept by the people of Israel. These are not stories that are being made up later, or even something where somebody says, "Well, I remember the old story that was told. I think this is what happened." I mean, they've got a detail here. The sword is 18 inches, plus you got the handle, and the guy's fat enough that that when you jab him with that sword, that it goes. That's it. I mean, this is Marlon Brando in I just lost the name of Apocalypse Now. I mean, this is a fat guy, and the whole sword is gone into him, and that kills him. But that's it's a graphic detail. But it's not just an Ehud was mighty and majestic and went out and slayed the enemy. No, you get the minute by minute, play by play, and so we see this as evidence, actually, of why we can trust that the story is accurate. Because this is not a heroic story that you would make up. Okay, this isn't Batman, this isn't Bruce Wayne who sees his parents murdered and then, becomes the Batman and defends people and defends the wicked. This is not somebody like that. Ehud's story is not, he was beat down and then he rose up and did this and he was great and mighty and he, fought the king in single combat and won. Instead, this is a sneaky guy who snuck in and stabbed the guy, locked the doors to his, basically hit the body. You want the short version of what happens here? He hides the body in the bathroom, locks the door, and goes out, because that's what you pick up. Eglon's servants are waiting for him and says, well, we're waiting for him. Perhaps he's, they think he's relieving himself, and then wait so long that they're embarrassed about it, and they go in and see, oh, he's actually dead. Okay, they have to break into the king's bathroom. That's what's happening here, folks. This is not a heroic story. It's not the kind of story that you would make up and tell your kids to grow up and be like Ehud. You just wouldn't. But it's the very real way that God delivered His people, and that's something to draw from this, is that God delivers His people sometimes through great heroic moments of David, the slingshot, the giant, and sometimes through sneaky people who are trying to act in obedience with the skills that they have available. Ehud didn't have the opportunity to be great and heroic. He just had to be obedient. He just had to grab hold of what was there. And so we take that actually as evidence it's a reliable story. This is the truth of what actually happened, because nobody would make this story up. So that's the first thing from it. And the second is exactly that use what God's given you. Don't play in the street with it, okay? But use what God's given you. Maybe God's made you left-handed instead of great and strong and mighty. Maybe you're a little bit more of somebody who thinks through and schemes a little bit. You use your brain. Why don't you just muscle up on it? Use what God gave you.
Maybe God made you somebody who can't sing. Use what God gave you. Maybe God made you somebody that can't sing. Use what God gave you. Use the abilities that God's given you. Don't let people decide for you what you're going to do. When God has equipped you to do something else. Don't let people decide for you that, well, we won't take this. You have to do that. You realize this. There's nothing here that tells you that the people of Israel thought Ehud would be a great guy. The guy that comes after him is Shamgar, and all we get about him is that he strikes down 600 Philistines with an ox yoke. And I mean, that's just a long stick with a pointy end on it. I mean, we don't know if he's in one battle and kills 600 guys at once, or if he's in 600 one-on-one fights. We don't. I mean, what we do know is that these are guys that God raises up and uses. And there's no evidence that the people of Israel got to looking around and said, Ehud seems like, let's put him in charge of delivering us. They cried out to God, and someone, Ehud, Shamgar, steps up and answers God's call and says, I will do this. And they're not automatically the smartest person or the most likely person, but they're the person who is willing to walk in obedience. So your decision is this: are you going to walk in obedience? Or do you want to be one of the many that sits around and says, well, I wish somebody would. Won't God give us somebody to do this? Won't God give us somebody in our community that will do this? Won't God give us somebody in our family that will do this? Won't God give us somebody in our church that will do this? Won't God give us somebody in our nation that will rise up and do this, and fix this problem, or deal with that problem? Whether it's a social problem, a societal issue, maybe it's a problem in your school. You say, we just need somebody that does this. If you are the person that God is calling, don't sit there and wait for somebody else to do it. If you're the one that God has made aware of you, rise up. Take care of it. Moab becomes subject to Israel that day, and the land has peace on that side of in that part of Israel has peace for 80 years. Peace outlives Ehud, most likely. He's old enough to be the guy to carry the tribute in the first place, so he's going to be of reasonable maturity. The likelihood that he lives another 80 years is pretty much a stretch. What he does lives after him. Land has peace longer after Ehud than it does after any of the other judges. Because God uses him. Because he's willing to be obedient, he's willing to come to his God. So come with what you got. And see where God takes you and how God uses you. Because he has a purpose and a plan, he has a use and a call for every one of us. Let's not set it aside. Let's pray again. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your love, your grace, your truth. Thank you for your word. We pray that you help us to take it this week and apply it to our lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all for being here. Don't forget to come to church Wednesday night.